How do you feel like politicians need to like balance the line then on media, on internet between being unsanitized versus being interesting and like viral? Like, is there a balance that they're supposed to strike? Because it's weird to have politicians who essentially, to some degree, need to also be entertaining, which is like what creates virality. Do you see that like negatively impacting the type of people that run or the type of politicianship that
And
like
then
occurs?
even on the back of that, because I feel like after Trump got into office, we got this constant like, is politics changing forever? Is politics going to be different forever? Is politics what does the new post-Trump politician look like? And they look about the same as the last ones. And even though Trump, it's strange because Trump in some ways showed that you could break a lot of the traditional paradigm of basically everything, that you can fuck porn stars while you're married and pay hush money to them, that you can talk about, women's pussies privately and raping them or grabbing them unconsensually, or that you can make fun of prisoners of war. You can do all these insane things, but then it seems like now we're at this era in politics, and the average politician is still more or less the same. Like, it feels like the answer to that question was no, Trump didn't really change anything.
Or should they change?
I
Yeah.
mean, so there's always been the phenomenon of the media hungry politician.
Mhm.
Back in the day, it was that they always wanted to be in the local papers. They wanted to be written up. And then in the age of television is that they always wanted to be on television. And when cable came out, they were all jockeying for spots on cable news, and they still do that. And now social media is just another part of that, right? So we can acknowledge first that this has always been the case. Politicians have always been people who want attention. And I think to some degree this is always gonna be the case, and social media is just a new expression of that. I think there are a lot of politicians who would benefit from recognizing that their skills are elsewhere. There's a lot of people who, frankly, it doesn't really benefit them that much to be on social media because all they have to do is make the people in their district happy. And
Mhm.
maybe in their district, like I don't know. There's a big fishing contingent because it's in Maine, and it's like all the lobster fishers, and so all they have to do is be real good on lobster issues, or just something like. There's a lot of these things where like things are actually way more hyper local than we realize. But what happens is that politicians, like anyone else, are influenced by the people around them. There's that common saying like you are the sum of the average of the five people you spend the most time around,
Mhm.
and that's kind of bullshit, but kind of true in some ways. And all of their staffers are super online poisoned, Gen Z people
Yeah.
who spend way too much time on TikTok and Twitter and arguing about politics, and who love it and who are energized by arguing about politics. And so you get a lot of these, Congress people who traditionally would have been, they wanted to get on, in the papers, on TV, but to talk about their stuff, to talk about how I brought a base back to our district. I brought a factory built by the federal government to our district. And it's very local stuff, like real meat and potatoes kind of politics. And now they all want to wage the culture war.
Right.
Now the kind of archetype of the successful media hit is not bragging about something you did specifically for your district in order to win specific
It's like
votes.
moral posting
It's
about
moral
BLM
posturing
or
about the culture war.
yeah.
It's about, somebody talking about how the wokes are ruining society or whatever. Matt Gaetz stands up and talks about how wokeness is cultural Marxism, or whatever the case may be. Like that kind of nonsense has increased dramatically.
Do you think it's a result of specifically like not just Trump, but like it seems like Trump capitalized on something that nobody else was really willing to capitalize on before. That's why I suspect, maybe you guys might disagree with this premise, but I suspect why he has such a strong cult of personality is because he was willing to like defy all these old political rules, which really appealed to the anti-establishment type
Yeah.
conservatives, especially. Do you think that it's shifted as a result, or would you agree with Stephen that it hasn't?
I think that Trump. There's a lot of people who thought like I can be the next Trump, or I can use some of his playbook.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't think they're right. I think that actually it's very hard to do what Trump does without being Trump. Like the people who've tried to be Trump
Like
just
Vivek and stuff.
they haven't, it hasn't worked very well because he's got some like thing where he's never been shamed in his life. He'll do all this stuff, and I think his superpower to some extent is that he has no shame, like zero negative shame, where he'll say, oh, I like I like soldiers who weren't killed, instead of respecting dead soldiers or whatever. And people will get do the finger wag in the media at him, and he just seems to not care, and he just rolls with it. And I don't think anybody else can do that as effectively as he does. So at least in terms of the kind of Trumpist playbook of like have constant scandals, a new scandal every day just to make sure you stay in the news, I don't think anybody else can play that.
Like
And
most people can't weather the scandal.
most
itself.
people can't weather the scandals the way that he does magically somehow.
Do you ever have a Dreamcast growing up?
Dreamcast, like the game system.
Yeah.
I had a Nintendo. I never had a Dreamcast, but I know.
Like
But
a Nintendo original, or are you saying Nintendo like a boomer? Like you had a Nintendo 64 and you call that a Nintendo?
I had.
Wait, isn't that an?
I had
Nintendo?
a
no
Super. I had a Super Nintendo.
There
Was
you
my
go.
first
Okay.
one.
That's
yeah.
a real
Nintendo.
one. Why is
Yeah.
a Nintendo 64 not a Nintendo?
because you wouldn't call it a Nintendo.
Okay.
It's just that it makes sense. Okay.
Alright.
Yeah.
That when the
Yeah, the
Dreamcast,
64 was called a 64.
yes,
Yeah.
but not a Nintendo. When you
But was it a Nintendo? Was it like a box that you played games out of?
Nintendo
Yes,
would have been like
yes.
a higher classification.
It
for
was made by the Nintendo
Ah.
Corporation.
When the Dreamcast
like a
came out, it had a
bird.
lot of capabilities and features that were revolutionary, but the world wasn't ready for them. I don't think. So when it came to like online play, like I don't think the world was quite ready for the internet infrastructure wasn't there. We were still using phone lines to hook up our stuff, and we had dial up. And yeah, I just don't think that there was that broad societal support for what the Dreamcast had to offer. So that system flopped horribly, and I think Sega basically quit the console market as a result. I feel like when people look at Donald Trump, sometimes I think of Donald Trump as like a Dreamcast that hit at the right time, to where people will look at Donald Trump and they'll be like, oh, like Donald Trump can get away with all this crazy stuff because he's Donald Trump. But I don't think it's just because he's Donald Trump. I think it's because he actually slotted, and not through any political like knowledge of his own, just by luck, he happened to slot into the right place at the right time. So for instance, that making fun of POWs or whatever, making fun of prisoners of war, that wouldn't have flown 20 years ago. But in a world where America is traumatized by our foreign policy experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, maybe you can make those jokes, or when it comes to, I don't know, things like infidelity or stuff like that maybe Republicans don't care about this as much because they're fixated on other cultural things, like they're worried about losing to the woke schools and stuff, so they've got like a little bit more leeway here.
Yeah.
I think that Donald Trump he's not just a unique person, but he also came at a unique point in time as well. Like his prior to running, I don't know if a lot of people remember this. I forget this sometimes. Do you remember what Donald Trump's first foray into the political world was?
It depends on what you define as political, but the two things that come into my mind are him making a bunch of statements about like the Central Park Five,
Kind of, a
and
little.
then also he got involved in some big public infrastructure projects, but I don't think that's what you're referring to.
I'm gonna refer to something bigger. It was that Obama birth certificate stuff.
Oh
That
yeah,
was
yeah.
huge, and he was like the primary pusher of that. And I think that him being that huge pushing of that, him aligning with Sheriff Arpaio or Arpaio in
Yeah.
Texas, and that coming at the same time as kind of like the Donald subreddit, and then it was the QAnon stuff on 4chan, and then it was the explosion of like the online Facebook groups, that all of that conspiratorial stuff, and then all of that Trump stuff, and then all of the hatred for the foreign policy stuff, and then
You
Americans
could throw in like the intellectual dark web there. A lot of them
Yeah.
like migrated into Trump
and then
world.
and then
Yeah.
Republicans finally understanding why some people don't like big business, but it just happened because they got woke. And they're
Yeah.
like, well, wait, maybe unions and protections, and maybe these people do need to be broken up. I think that Trump was just at the perfect epicenter of all that happening. So when people try to duplicate Trump, they look too much at the qualities that he has and not the fact that he just happened to slot in at the perfect time for the person that he was,
Yeah.
I think.